If you love the look of the Jeep Grand Cherokee, but you'd rather have something a little bit easier to park and a little bit lighter on your budget, you might be drawn to something like this, the Jeep Compass. It's certainly styled like the Grand Cherokee's Mini-Me. It's also priced like a miniaturized Grand Cherokee. And by that I mean it's less expensive than the Grand Cherokee, but it's one of the most expensive small SUVs in its segment right now. Does that mean it's the best, or does that simply mean it's the most expensive? Let's find out. The Compass is, of course, completely unrelated to the Grand Cherokee. It's based on a completely different transverse engine platform. But strangely enough, in addition to looking like a Grand Cherokee in terms of its style, it's sized about the same as the original Grand Cherokee back in the 1990s. That ZJ Grand Cherokee was only a few inches longer than this Jeep Compass. And that's part of the reason that this segment, the subcompact crossover segment, has been absolutely exploding in North America, because this is really that same mid-size segment that we all remember, only we're calling it something a little different because everything else has grown. And there are a ton of options in this segment to choose from. We can't cover them all in this video. We have something like the Subaru Crosstrek, basically a lifted wagon, the small Outback if you will, the Bronco Sport, the Bronco's Mini-Me, kind of logical since we have a Grand Cherokee Mini-Me. We have the Honda HR-V, one of the most middle-of-the-road sort of white bread style crossovers available. We have the Corolla Cross with fantastic fuel economy, the divisively styled Kona, the very boxy Seltos, and on and on and on. Whether you want front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, whether you want plug-in hybrids, or electric versions, there are a ton of options to choose from. But let's dive back into the Compass. The miniaturized styling certainly makes this one of the more attractive entries in this segment, at least to my eye, but it's also, again, one of the more expensive. It starts at just under $30,000 for 2024, $29,995, and it will go over $50,000 when well equipped. This particular model is solidly over $40,000, and that's why we have these projector LED headlights. Reflectors are going to be standard. They are still LEDs, but they're going to be reflectors, not the combination reflector and projector lamp we see here. And the LED fog lights down below, those are optional in every trim, rather unusually. The lower end trim doesn't have fog lights at all. The next trim up gets cornering lights and halogen fog lights. Then optional on all the trims are the LED fog lights. I do think that's a bit of a weird twist. No Jeep would be complete without a 7-slot grille, so of course we find one here. In this video we're talking about 2024 features and 2024 pricing, but this particular model is a 2023. The only change on the outside is a very, very minor change to the shape of the grille inserts themselves. If you didn't park them next to each other, you probably would not notice the difference. Other than that, it's just gotten more expensive. When this generation of the Compass launched back in the 2017 model year, it was sort of a tweener SUV. It was on the large side of the subcompact segment, but definitely smaller than a compact SUV like a CR-V or a RAV4. And that made sense at the time, because Jeep had the larger Cherokee and they also had the smaller Renegade. For 2024, the Renegade continues on essentially unchanged, but the Cherokee has been discontinued, at least for the moment. We don't know what the Cherokee is going to come back as, but rumor says it's not going to come back with the Cherokee name. At any rate, that means that this has to do sort of double duty now. It's competing with the RAV4 and the CR-V, but also with entries like the Kona and the Seltos, and of course, the Subaru Crosstrek. But this is no longer on the large side of the subcompact segment. It's about the same size as the Bronco Sport, but definitely less boxy in the back, also about the same length as a Chevy Trailblazer. It's only about that much shorter than that original Grand Cherokee again, so that should tell you the size and how things have increased. It's also a little bit wider than that Grand Cherokee, oddly enough. We of course have the standard Jeep look here with the squared off wheel arches, and this particular model has the upgraded tires. You can get 215 width tires on the base model or 235 width tires on the top end model. Some of the mid-level trims split the difference with 225s. Ground clearance is going to come in between 8.1 and 8.6 inches depending on the version you look at, but all-wheel drive is now standard. For the past few decades, Jeep has certainly been cultivating an image that is equal parts luxury and off-road capable, and that certainly applies to the Compass's styling as well. We have a 4x4 badge here, rather than an all-wheel drive badge like you'd find in most of the competition, although honestly, that's a marketing distinction without much of a difference, because the all-wheel drive system is thematically very similar to the competition's. But unlike something like a Subaru Crosstrek, there's not a lot of black body cladding going on here. In fact, there's none going on around this Compass because this is the limited trim, so we get the body colored panels down here, well-integrated parking sensors, and optional LED taillights. These are very attractive. They have 3 light pipes inside. It's a really good look, but these are going to be optional on every trim of Compass. You have to actually not just get the upper level trims, but you also have to check an option box to get these particular taillights. Now there is still black body plastic on the outside, but it's up here because this has the two-tone paint scheme. If you got the monotone Compass, it really would be very one color without any of that controversial cladding around. Now, if you are a fan of blacked out wheel arches, fear not, you can still get them on the Compass, you just won't find them on the limited trim. Much of the base price difference between the Compass and the competition can be explained by what's going on under the hood. We find a standard 2-liter turbo producing 200 horsepower and 221 pound-feet of torque. Also standard, the 8-speed automatic transmission and all-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, whatever you want to call it. That combo will give you 27 miles per gallon and can tow up to 2,000 pounds when properly equipped. CVTs are what you find in most of the competition, so if you're not a fan of a continuously variable automatic, you might want to choose this. It has a traditional stepped automatic. That's something that you'll find optional in a Kona or in a Kia Seltos, but is standard under this hood. And the reason I mention those is because it appears this actually uses the same 8-speed automatic transmission. It does look like it's made by Hyundai, so it's probably the exact same one that's mated to their 1.6 in the new Kona. After a week of mixed driving, I found the front seats to be relatively comfortable, but these are not necessarily the best in this segment. We don't have all the same adjustability that you might expect out of a top-end Jeep, only 2-way adjustable lumbar support, and I do find the seat bottom cushion to be just a little on the short side. We do, however, have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion. I'm going to go ahead and give these seats 8 out of 10 points when it comes to the front seat comfort. I think the seats in the top-end Mazda CX-30 are a little bit more comfortable than this, and that certainly has a very premium vibe in this segment. Also, I think the Kia Seltos and Hyundai Kona have slightly more comfortable front seats as well. Something for taller drivers to consider is the optional panoramic moonroof. It definitely makes the interior look light and airy, but it reduces driver's side headroom pretty significantly. You can see that over here I have maybe about 1.5 inches of headroom left. That would increase significantly if you opted for the regular steel roof. This is not the roomiest back seat in the segment, but it's still pretty comfortable. This front seat's adjusted for a 6'5" passenger, so it's all the way back in its tracks. I have about 2 inches of legroom left. I also have a wide and comfortable armrest. The rear seat backs don't recline, they're just in this particular fixed position, but I do appreciate the fact that the center seat belt comes out of the seat back itself. That certainly makes it a lot easier to put a child seat right in the center and keep it centered in the vehicle. It also doesn't interfere with the cargo dimensions in the back or the cargo opening in the rear. Another nice touch, we have air vents back here, something that a surprising number of small crossovers and SUVs in America are deleting in the name of cost savings. Something like a Subaru Crosstrek, you can't get rear seat air vents in any version of that for some reason in North America, although oddly enough, Subaru offers them in other world markets. If I move over here to the middle seat, you'll notice that there is a reasonable hump right there in the middle, but I also get features like USB-C charge ports and a 12-volt power outlet in the middle. Sitting in this middle seat position, I actually have a little bit more headroom than I did in the outboard seating positions. And scooting all the way over here to the left, where I'm right behind myself, this front seat's adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I now have about 4 inches of legroom left or so. This is not quite enough room to install a rear-facing child seat behind myself, though. If you have kids in rear-facing child seats, you might want to look at something bigger because even though this seat fits back here, it's not at the proper angle according to the little level guide, and of course it's touching the front seat. Now, if I move it over here to the middle seat position, I can get a little bit closer. Obviously, if it was latched in, it'd actually be pressing into the seat a bit more. The level indicator appears to be in the right zone, but it is still touching these front seats. So you might be able to do it if you were able to juggle the seats around just a little bit and you had just one child right in the middle. There's also going to be actually enough room for someone to sit next to that rear-facing child seat thanks to the width of the Compass, which is surprisingly wide for this group. Behind this available power hatch, we find 27.2 cubic feet of cargo capacity. That is enough to accommodate quite a number of these 22-inch roller bags, but also 4 of the 24-inch roller bags we use in our luggage testing. That is one below the average for the next size category up, where we would find the CR-V and the RAV4, but it's still a pretty decent showing for a vehicle like the Compass. You could also take your luggage out and put some cargo under this 2-stage load floor, so you can actually lift this up, put it in a position that's approximately 4 inches higher, you'd then be able to accommodate a large number of thin aisles under the load floor, or you could of course get a spare tire. This model doesn't have the temporary spare, it just has a can of Fix-A-Flat there in the middle. I get asked about this feature a great deal. The button to close the hatch is over here on the left side of the cargo area. That puts that button a lot closer to the ground, and it means that it's going to be a lot easier for children or shorter adults to close that hatch versus one that was on the lid of that hatch and that would end up about 6 feet off the ground when it was open. As we look around the interior, keep in mind the base price of the Compass, which is around $30,000 for 2024, and the price tag of this high-altitude trim, sorry if I called it a limited earlier, it is a high-altitude, which is about $43,000 for 2024. We have sliding sun visors for the driver and front passenger, and we have this really enormous moonroof that really makes it look a lot airier in here than it would otherwise, because this interior is just black on black on black. Everything is very, very dark in here. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests. Before we take a look at the seats, let's take a look at the door panels themselves first, both front and rear. Up front, we have a reasonable percentage of soft touch materials. We have a stitched insert right there, nice soft touch armrest, and then sort of a rubbery soft coating on the upper section of the door. You can definitely see the start of the shiny black plastic that we find a lot of in here though, and obviously harder plastics down at the bottom of the door to help improve durability. Moving to the back door, we find a very similar design, but notably less premium materials. So we still have that stitched insert there in the middle, but we have lots of hard plastics up on the top of the door where you're going to put your arm, etc. I am a little bit surprised by that, especially given the price tag of this model and a fully loaded trim. The seats, however, in the back, they are pretty comfortable, and they look very similar to the seats up front, even though the front seats offer both heating and ventilation, which is definitely a nice touch. You don't find too many vented seats in this segment, and this is one of those vehicles that offers that option. Not terribly aggressive bolstering on the front seat back or seat bottom cushions certainly means larger folks shouldn't have a problem sitting there. On the other hand, those with smaller frames might find the seat bottom cushion just a little bit too broad and not having enough support on the side, so you may end up sliding around just a little bit more than you'd like. Moving over to the dashboard, let's just take a quick pan around so you can see the style. This looks an awful lot like the Grand Cherokee, both inside and outside, as far as the dashboard design goes. We have some stitched materials in the midsection of the dashboard, soft touch injection molded upper section. This is not a large air vent that runs across, although it does hide the very slim air vent that we find over there on the passenger side. It mimics what's going on the driver's side. We have this attractive trim panel in the dashboard. It kind of looks like brushed metal, but it's actually a plastic trim piece with that little chrome section right on there. Definitely dresses the interior up and certainly makes it look like the bigger and more expensive Jeeps. Hard plastics down here, of course, on the bottom of the dash, just like you'd expect. Pretty big glove compartment there. I was able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside, absolutely no problem. This LCD is just over 10 inches inside, and it is standard on all trims of the Compass. You don't have to work your way up to get this particular screen, although only the upper end trims are going to have factory navigation. It is pretty easy to navigate around because we have these direct access buttons down there at the bottom and these fixed items up here at the top. So for easier access to seat heating, ventilation, steering wheel heating, etc. I do love the functionality of this Uconnect screen, and I like the fact that they give us a lot of physical buttons. So if you want to turn off start stop, there's a button there, stability traction control, lane keeping assistance, parking sensors. Also, we have a lot of physical buttons down here for the climate control functions, volume knob, mute button, the button to turn the screen on and off, etc. My only major complaint with this interior is the amount of shiny black plastic that we find in here. It's certainly going to show dust, fingerprints, and scratches more easily than the matte plastics that we also find scattered around the dashboard, but most of the trim pieces are going to be this shiny black variety. We have a nice knurled ring around that engine start-stop button. I think that helps dress things up a bit. And thankfully those buttons I showed you earlier are not shiny black plastic, but the plastic that surrounds them certainly is. And again, it's definitely going to show those fingerprint scratches and dust, as is the black plastic right here in the middle of everything. We have a pretty traditional console shifter, 2 USB ports there, USB-A and USB-C. This does support wireless CarPlay, but I have my phone plugged in at the moment, so you have the choice of which way you'd like to go. Again, manual mode over there, electric parking brake over there, and this is effectively the drive mode toggle. You can adjust the way the vehicle behaves as far as the drivetrain, traction control, stability control, etc. goes. We have auto mode, snow mode, and sand and mud, and you'll notice if I click that toggle, this four-wheel drive lock button lights up. Now, this is not a true transfer case in this vehicle. That's just going to be more aggressive at locking the center coupling between the transmission and the rear differential. It's not going to give it a complete lock. In the middle of everything, we have two very large cup holders. That's a really nice touch. I had no problem fitting large takeout drinks inside, although this car is pretty small, so we have an armrest that slides over that and then ends up effectively blocking one of those cup holders from being used. If I lift that up out of the way, we have a pretty deep storage area there, but it's not terribly large, so you'd have troubles fitting things like a gallon of milk inside. Obviously, I don't think even a half gallon would fit. We do have a soft touch, really squishy armrest in the middle, however. A surprising touch in here is the full LCD instrument cluster. If you get the lower end trims, then you'll have a 7-inch LCD cluster. If you get the upper end trims, then we have this full 10-inch display. This operates very similarly to the one that we find in the Grand Cherokee. It's controlled via this button array on the left side of the steering wheel. We have a 4-way direction button, OK, and then we have this sort of tableau button. That button allows you to toggle between more of a traditional view and more of this app-centric view where you can actually toggle around and click a specific app. The display also gives us a ton of additional readouts like auxiliary gauges there. You get turn-by-turn navigation directions, you get your trip computer information, and as you'd expect, you get the choice between more of a contemporary view and more of an analog gauge view depending on your personal preferences. And as you toggle through options, those gauges are going to either shrink or expand depending on what you're doing. As I showed you earlier, the steering wheel is very similar to what we find in the Grand Cherokee with those controls on the left side. We find the controls for the adaptive cruise control over here on the right side, big Jeep logo in the middle, and as we typically find in Stellantis vehicles, you'll find the infotainment controls on the back of the steering wheel. So volume up, down over here on this side, track forward, backward on the other. You'll notice that the turn signal stalks definitely are still like we used to find in the Compass. So these have definitely been borrowed out of some Fiat models. They feel a little bit different than the rest of the Jeep lineup like the Grand Cherokee in North America. Since the Jeep Compass is ostensibly the off-roady entry in this segment, let's start out by taking this out on this relatively mild trail. The first thing you'll notice is we've been doing some trail maintenance, of course, since this is a private trail here, and the narrower dimensions of the Compass make it easier to navigate around these piles of things that we still need to clean up. So that's definitely one big advantage for the Compass over some of the larger options out there. And if you currently have something like a Jeep Cherokee and maybe you've decided you don't quite need that 2-speed transfer case, this might be a good alternative, something a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to deal with. Now, as far as the performance numbers go, some people will be impressed and some people won't be. This model ran 0 to 60 in 7.9 seconds. That is faster than average, actually, for a base engine, but there are going to be options that are faster than this as far as their optional engines go. To be honest, I'd expected the 0 to 60 time to be a little bit closer to 7 seconds than 8 seconds, but I think it's the curb weight. This is over 3,600 pounds as equipped, and that's not exactly lightweight. You will go faster 0 to 60 in the optional turbocharged engine available in the Kona and the Seltos. Although we do find more ground clearance, something definitely important in some of these areas here. That dip right there actually is quite low. You can actually hear the air dam on the front of the Compass scraping a little bit, but no scrapes underneath the vehicle. It's also important for this pile of sticks here that we're about to run over. You can actually hear them knocking just a little bit around underneath the vehicle. Nothing bad's going on there. We have over 8 inches of ground clearance. That's definitely a healthy number. But back to the 0 to 60 time. I think the other reason for the slightly slower score is the automatic transmission. This is not the fastest shifting automatic, so some of the options that do have regular stepped automatics do seem to shift a little bit faster, including the Kona and the Seltos, and the reason I keep mentioning them is because they most likely use exactly the same 8-speed automatic transmission. Despite the curb weight, 60 to 0 stopping distances were pretty reasonable on this Compass. It took 120 feet for this to stop from highway speeds. And that is because of the 235 width tires that we find on this model. You should know that if you get the base trims, they're going to have narrower tires, and those stopping distances will probably linger out, probably more like 130 feet. But the 0 to 60 time is still going to be the same as this. And that's probably the important thing for people that are shopping for a $30,000 option. For that $30,000 price point, most of the competition would have less power than this, and they wouldn't be quite as zippy, especially in passing maneuvers or out on trails where you might need a little bit more power. Now, as far as handling goes, on-road handling specifically, I think the Compass does a pretty good job balancing worlds. Actual handling ability is pretty good. Feel, that's not exactly the Compass's strong suit, let's just say. I think it's better tuned to this trail than it is to a paved road. The steering is a little on the vague side. It's a little bit difficult to tell exactly what the front of the vehicle is up to. On a trail like this, that sort of over-boosted steering makes a lot of sense because it makes it much more comfortable to drive this on a wide variety of surfaces. But on-road, it actually feels a little bit less direct, honestly, than my old Jeep Grand Cherokee with recirculating ball steering, and that was never known for exactly great steering feel. So again, it's really going to depend a bit on your priorities. Do you like something that feels, a little bit lazier as far as the steering response, but still has good handling? Or do you prefer something that feels sharp, even if it is not necessarily actually a better handling vehicle than the Compass? I'll leave that up to you. The ride quality in the Compass is definitely good. It's definitely suited for this kind of trail, even though these are lower aspect ratio tires than you'll find on the Trailhawk version of the Compass. It's still very, very comfortable out on this kind of surface. This is the kind of vehicle where you could easily spend an hour or two wandering a lot closer to that trailhead at the national park than you'd be able to in something like a Corolla Cross or a Honda HR-V. Those are definitely a little more on-road focused than this particular option. Exactly which system is right for you is going to depend on the kind of off-roading you do, but the four-wheel drive lock mode in this all-wheel drive system is much more aggressive at locking the center coupling than the X mode system that we find in the Subaru Crosstrek. So you will feel actually a little bit of binding in tight corners until the vehicle realizes that and then releases that coupling a bit. So this is going to give you closer to a traditional four-wheel drive off-road kind of feel, especially when you're in off-camber situations. The all-wheel drive programming in this vehicle is especially important when we're in situations like this where I have tires up in the air because there's that big chug hole there on the ground, or when we're coming up over some logs over here. This system definitely feels a little bit more Jeep-like, but it's never going to feel like a mini Grand Cherokee as far as its capability goes. That's because this does not have traditional lockers, and it does not have a traditional transfer case. So it's never going to be able to send quite as much power equally to the front and rear axle like you'll find in the Grand Cherokee. We also don't have an adaptive air suspension or things like that, but I think this is a faithful miniaturization of the capability that we find in that larger model, and also a pretty decent amount of capability for this segment generally. If we're, for instance, on this little incline here and I just punch it, you can feel that all four tires are really doing their best to try and get the vehicle forward, and the system is definitely more aggressive at sending power to the rear than you'll find in the HR-V or the Corolla Cross or some of those options like that. As far as cabin noise goes, in our testing here at 50 miles an hour, obviously not on this road surface, I measured 71.5 decibels. So this is actually one of the quieter entries in this segment. Keep in mind that if you get the base trim, that does appear to be a little bit louder. I was able to spend a very short amount of time with a dealer-provided base compass, and obviously the interior is not as premium. There's a lot more hard plastic going on. It's not going to feel, the seats are not quite as nice, etc. But also the cabin is a little bit louder seeming. I have a feeling that could be due to the tires or just some of the changes around sound insulation in the cabin. I wasn't able to get a direct answer as to why that base model did seem a little bit louder. Fuel economy, that's actually been quite good. I've been averaging 29 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving. This vehicle is theoretically EPA rated for 27, so I'm actually going to call that an A. Obviously, an A as compared to non-hybrid competitors, because if you want the best fuel economy and it's going to beat this by a mile, that would be the Corolla Cross Hybrid. You can, honest to goodness, get 50 miles per gallon out of that vehicle if you treat it gently. In real-world driving, even hill climbing, etc., you're going to be around 40 some odd miles per gallon. Fuel economy is absolutely fantastic. Off-road capability, not really that vehicle's strong suit. It's fairly low to the ground in the hybrid model, and the hybrid system does not have the ability to send as much power to the rear. It has a relatively small electric motor in the back, and it cannot lock any sort of mechanical coupling, so it's never going to be able to send as much power to the rear as this vehicle. Now, when we're going back uphill, I should mention that this turbo does have kind of a peaky nature as far as its power delivery. You have to dig a little bit deeper into the throttle than I would sometimes like, and then you get a little bit more torque, all the torque you need to get out, but then the wheels start spinning and scrabbling a little bit more than I would like. It does make it a little bit more difficult to really stay in the meat of the vehicle's power band. If you were to get the Trailhawk model, then things are a little bit different because they do change the final drive ratio on the transmission. We don't actually get a 2-speed transfer case like you found in the Cherokee. In that vehicle, the crawl ratio, which is what Jeep calls it, is just first gear, and it's about 20-1. That's not bad, but I do wish that they had tweaked this turbo to give it a little bit more low-end torque, maybe have a mode where it dulled the throttle a little bit to help make these trails just a little bit more rational, a little bit more pleasant as far as driving up. This can feel just a little bit jumpy at times. On the surface of things, pricing is a problem for the Compass, so let's dig a little bit deeper into this. For 2024, the Compass starts at $29,995, basically $30,000 That includes destination. That's about $5,000 more than a Subaru Crosstrek, but about $3,000 less than the Bronco Sport. Now, pricing, I think, is definitely a problem for the Compass, but also talking about pricing is a problem for the Compass because we've returned to a pre-pandemic norm where discounts are definitely happening on dealer lots. In fact, right now, Jeep is offering between about $3,000 and $7,000 off of the Compass, depending on the trim you're looking at. Also, discounted financing offers, discounted lease offers, etc. That means that depending on the exact version of the Compass you're looking at, it may not be as expensive as it would otherwise seem. But don't get me wrong, it is still on the pricey side, especially when you start taking a look at some of the standard feature content. So we get things like the standard turbo engine, standard all-wheel drive, we get the push-button start, LED headlights, an LCD instrument cluster, etc. standard, but we also get a urethane steering wheel standard, and we don't have adaptive cruise control standard like you find in some of the competition. We do, however, have autonomous emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, and driver attention monitoring standard. If you want some of the more advanced features, you're really going to end up ratcheting the price tag of the Compass quite high. And rather oddly, once you leave the base sport trim and you start exploring the other trims of Compass, a lot of things are still optional. Limited trim, for instance, the upgraded LED headlights, still optional. By the time you make your way up to the Trailhawk trim, they're still optional. The high altitude trim, again, still optional. And that's why the base price of some of these trim levels is not really that far apart from one another, because they all have a ton of option packages available, and there are a ton of different ways to configure your Compass. There are no less than 8 different trim levels, tons of standalone options, etc. as well. So pricing out your Compass is going to be a little bit trickier than some of the competition. Since it's easy to go down the pricing and configuration rabbit hole, I'm just going to let you go ahead and do that. If you're interested in a Compass on the Jeep website and configure your own, come back and let us know in the comment section what you think about that. Let's just dive into the pros and cons first. We have a solid base engine. In fact, actually performance, the engine and transmission combination is a really solid reason to get the Compass over any of the alternatives really, especially the ones that have continuously variable automatics. If you're not a fan of a CVT, if you're not a fan of under 150 horsepower and relatively slow 0 to 60s, you certainly want to take a look at the Compass. You should know that when we're talking about 0 to 60s, the Trailhawk model is going to be a little bit quicker to 60 because it has a more aggressive final drive ratio. That's part of the reason that the model we were testing is a little bit slower, I think, than my first impressions with the Compass, which were in a Trailhawk. That hasn't exactly been a Jeep thing for a while, but fuel economy is definitely decent as long as we're not talking about the hybrid alternatives. Styling is definitely a big hit for the Compass. I think inside and outside it has an attractive look, and for 2024 you can now get an even more attractive interior color option, which is a combination of black and brown leather, something that we've seen in the Jeep Grand Cherokee for a while. I think that really dresses the Compass's cabin up. Unfortunately, there is the price tag, and there's also unproven reliability. The previous generations of the Compass haven't been great reliability-wise. The track record pre-2023 wasn't exactly great either. We don't know what the new drivetrain will bring to the Compass. Hopefully it will get better with this new transmission. A lot of folks did not like the ZF 9-speed, even though there was truly nothing wrong with it in most cases. They just didn't like the way that it feels. And this 8-speed feels totally normal. So in that respect, I think it's going to be a big win there. Also, the tech inside the cabin is great. The full LCD instrument cluster, the big LCD infotainment system, wireless CarPlay, etc. That's all great. But then there's, again, pricing and the discounts and everything. That whole process just seems to be a bit of a pain. Let's dive into the competition. One thing that won't have that kind of pricing drama is going to be the Subaru Crosstrek. You're probably not going to get a discount at the Subaru dealer. It's selling like hotcakes. The number of configurations is much lower, and the standalone options are much fewer as well. So the Crosstrek is pretty much just you pick your color, you pick your trim level, and that's what you get. Now, unfortunately, you're never going to get a turbo engine, and you're never going to get a stepped automatic transmission, and you're never going to get air vents in the back. So if any of those are of concern to you, you might want to shop elsewhere. The Crosstrek actually is basically a mini Outback in terms of its form factor. It's a Subaru Impreza hatchback or wagon, whatever you want to call it, lifted up with a bit of extra body cladding, and that's a fantastic combo for a lot of folks. Fuel economy is also pretty good there. The Corolla Cross Hybrid, I think, is probably one of my favorite entries in this segment simply because of its fuel economy and the promise of high reliability. If you're looking for the most reliable entry in this segment, all bets are probably towards that Corolla Cross in its hybrid trim. You're also going to be getting fantastic fuel economy.
If you want more off-road capability, that's not necessarily what you'd find in the Compass, but you will find in the Bronco Sport primarily because of the upper end trims that feature their twin clutch axle unit. Ford not only has the aggressive center coupling lock that we find in the Jeep, they also have effectively a limited slip mechanical rear axle in that model. It'll torque vector, it will limited slip, and that's probably why the Bronco Sport beats this entire segment really when it comes to off-road capability. Previously, the Cherokee was up there. It was actually better than the Bronco Sport, but the Cherokee's gone now, and they did not put the Cherokee's novel 2-speed transfer case setup into the Compass. So off-road ability is going to be a little bit better in the Bronco Sport, but you're going to pay for it. The Bronco Sport does come with a standard turbo, but it's a standard 3-cylinder turbo. The performance is not going to be as good as the Compass. If you're looking for boxy and rugged styling, the Seltos is going to be a hard option to beat. For about the same price as a Latitude trim of the Compass, you could get a fully loaded Seltos with the 1.6-liter turbo. It's going to produce just under 200 horsepower, so not far off where we find the Compass. It's going to be lighter, so you get better 0 to 60 performance. It has better on-road handling. And for the price tag, you're going to get bigger screens and better gadgets than you'll find in the Jeep. It won't give you wireless CarPlay, but I think that's a small price to pay for the fresher and more modern interior, the better interior components that you're going to find at that price point inside the Kia, and of course, its long standard warranty. The boxy shape and boxy profile of the Seltos also gives you a really practical rear seat area, a big practical cargo area, and I think that the boxy design works a little bit better in the Seltos. It is certainly inspired by the boxy Telluride, but it doesn't come across as simply a shrunken down version, which the Compass really does look like from a lot of angles. Instead, the Seltos pays homage to that really successful Kia, but it does so with a fresh twist on that. So it's definitely borrowing some of those styling cues, but it doesn't simply look like a miniaturized Telluride. If my money were on the line in this segment, I think I would be hard-pressed to choose between entries like the Crosstrek for its practicality and its low sticker price, the Seltos for its high feature content, and the Corolla Cross Hybrid because of the fuel economy. I certainly think there is still a place for the Compass, but it will largely depend on the kind of deal you get at the Jeep dealer lot and whether or not you really want that mini Grand Cherokee styling. If you do plan on taking your vehicle further off the beaten path, if you really do plan on off-roading your small SUV or crossover, then the Compass is going to be a solid upgrade over these other options. But how many people are really doing that? If you're simply looking at a great commuter car, a daily driver vehicle, something that can take you further off the beaten path on your weekend road trips away, all of these options are going to do just fine unless you are really pushing things to that 99th percentile. And then the Compass is going to be better. But unless that is you, I would say your hard-earned cash is probably spent somewhere else. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And again, is the mini Grand Cherokee styling enough for you, or would you rather get something else? Let me know, and I'll see all of you next week.